This is the web transcription service of the Royal Canadian Military Institute. On April 17th, the Institute hosted a special speakers luncheon with leading Canadian and international pollster and writer and RCMI member Darrell of Ipsos Public Affairs, who offered us some views on the outcome of the Alberta provincial election held the evening before, on voter trends in Canada, and on how to frame the upcoming Canadian federal election of October 2019. Darrell, welcome to the ship.
Thanks, Eric. Yes, I am a proud member of the RCMI. I don't get here very often because I spend a lot of time away, but I'm also an honorary member or an honorary colonel in the Army, just finishing my third term. And I think that's probably going to be it for me. But I proudly wear my regimental tie today because I'm here at RCMI. What I would like to talk to you about today is how to watch the upcoming federal election. There's a lot of conversation that takes place, a lot of, in the world of politics, a lot of opinions. What I'm going to try and do today is share with you how somebody who does what I do actually looks at what I would look at in order to try and handicap what's happening in the election campaign. Understanding that the last thing that you usually determine is what the vote is going to be. There's a lot of environmental things that are happening that add up to how people end up deciding to vote. So understanding those environmental factors prior to the actual election taking place gives you a good sense of where things are going to be heading. Now, I have a certain amount of prejudice about this. I wrote this book with John Ibbotson. Some of you may have read it. It's called The Big Shift. And the reason we wrote the book was because following the 2011 election, the typical media commentary about why Stephen Harper won in 2011 was it was a fluke. It was just a fluke. We were just going to kind of go back to the way things always were previously. We have a natural governing party, and Canadian politics really benefits the way that the Liberal Party wins, which is when the Liberal Party does well, what it does is it does really well in the province of Quebec and then wins enough in Ontario where it can basically win the national election. Wins enough also usually in Atlantic Canada, but doesn't usually do very well out west. And what John and I argued was that actually there's a new way emerging to win in Canadian politics, and that is the one that Stephen Harper pioneered, and you saw a little bit of it again last night, which is really a suburban approach to politics and electoral victory, because the suburbs are the most rapidly growing part of our country. We have a representation by population system. So over time what happens is the more populated growing parts of the country get more seats. So what's been happening over the space of the last 30 years is that the parts of the country that really benefit the Conservatives more than the Liberals or the NDP have been the parts that have been growing, which is in Western Canada and in the suburbs of the city of Toronto. So what our argument was there was a new coalition that was emerging, which was Western Canada plus the suburbs in Ontario. And there were enough seats there that you could actually win a majority government. In 2011, Stephen Harper won a majority with only 5 seats in the province of Quebec. And then Justin Trudeau strolled along, and everything that we said in the book didn't work. Except it did. Really what happened was it was another what we would call a big shift election in which Justin Trudeau figured out the one thing that you needed to figure out in order to win and beat Stephen Harper, which was how to win the suburbs in the province of Ontario by appealing to an economic message. Continually I get amazed by the things that I hear out of media commentators and historians about what drove particular election outcomes. I hear a lot of opinions, but I don't hear a lot of facts. And when you really do take a look at what drove Justin Trudeau's election victory back in 2015, yes, sunny ways, yes, all of the atmospheric things that were going on, yes, gender equity, identity politics, any way that you want to define it, but the real reason that he won was that he had a double-digit lead over Stephen Harper on economic management in the suburbs of Ontario, and if you do that, you win. That's where he formed his majority. I'll show you the actual numbers here in just a minute, but he won because he won in Ontario. And so the reason I point this out is because I do have a certain way of looking at it. you have to understand what I wrote in this book with John Ibbitson in order to appreciate what I'm going to tell you and where things are going to be going over the space of the next 7 or 8 months. So, first thing in understanding elections, context matters. The structure of the political system, how the demography in a country is changing, all matters. How the political system operates matters, and the cycle that we're in. And we're seeing a new cycle we're going through right now. Prior to the last federal election, orange and red was winning everything at the provincial level. Now blue is winning everything. Capped off last night with the absolutely crushing victory of Jason Kenney in Alberta. And by the way, all the polls, including our poll, underpredicted the margin that he won by. It was not even close. So it changes with every election. There's cycles that are happening. Incumbents usually have an advantage, but not lately. Incumbents have been getting pushed out of power. The primary election question in every election is change or not. Should we give the current conductor another trip, or should we hire another conductor? Then, after you make that decision, if change is in the air, if it's time for a change, then the question arises, what are the other options? So the 2015 federal election was not really a contest between Stephen Harper and Justin Trudeau and Thomas Mulcair. Stephen Harper and the Conservatives ended up getting exactly what they got on election day, the day the election started. They started at 32, they ended at 32. They barely fluctuated. All of the movement was between the NDP and the Liberals. Thomas Mulcair started way ahead, Justin Trudeau in third place. People took a look at the two of them and said, I wanted to have real change. It was a change election. That's why Justin Trudeau moved up and ended up becoming Prime Minister of the country, and the Liberals becoming a majority government. Fast and slow thinking, heuristics. I know all the political nerds like to get into the weeds when it comes to understanding policy. Politics is basically about fast thinking. It's about emotional responses. It's about whether or not I can connect with somebody. Do I like the look of them? Do I like the sound of their voice? Do I like their values? Do I like the way that they present themselves? Do they represent what I think the future needs to be in our country? Not going in and taking a look at our tax policy down to the 17th clause. That's not how voters operate. They operate on the basis of heuristics. It's fast thinking. What's my emotional response to a particular politician within the context of what's happening at that time? And really it comes down to political leadership more than it's ever come down to political leadership. It's really, what do you think of the leaders? How do they make you feel? And are they in harmony with the prevailing mood? If all of your talk is happy, but the public mood is gloomy, you look like you're not getting it. If you're gloomy and the public wants to see something happy, you also look like you're not getting it. So what is going to be the prevailing mood of the country as we move into this election cycle? And I'll give you some thoughts on that. You need to find an issue and you need to make it your own. This is not something that's new. Anybody who's worked in politics for any period of time would know this. Keith Davey is famous for saying this, the old guru of the Liberal Party. You need to find an issue and make it your own. It has to be an important issue in which you differentiate yourself from your opponents. There is no national election in Canada. It is really a series of regional, provincial, and sub-provincial elections. It comes down to what happens in total, but all of those battles are run on a very district basis, and in many instances, in many provinces, on a micro-district basis. So what happens in suburban Saskatchewan is very different from what happens in rural Saskatchewan, which is very different from what happens in urban Saskatchewan. It's about seats. It's not about the percentage of votes. In other words, you can win a higher percentage of the vote and a lower number of seats. It's about finding a place, a sweet spot on the political map in which your seats line up, or your votes line up with winning the highest number of seats. The place that everybody has to win is Ontario. That's where elections are won and lost now. And finally, are you getting a message or are you getting a mandate? And this is more about results. And this is I would say, the principal issue that the Liberal Party is dealing with right now. They have mistaken a message for a mandate. They believed they had far more support for what they were proposing than what people actually thought. And this is the main reason that they've run into the problems that they've run into, apart from some of the decisions that they've been making. So what is the mood of the country? Economic confidence is down. We just came out of field on this this week. Economic confidence is down again this month. So the public is feeling disrupted on an economic basis. Bull markets, so even if the stock market is doing really well, the public doesn't think it's benefiting from it. We're spending more on needs than wants. In fact, I saw an interesting article on Global News today. I think I retweeted it if you follow me on Twitter, showing that grocery prices, fresh produce, the price is up 15% this year over last year. That's real people. Those are real people paying that amount of money. Those are real issues for them. And affordability has become a much bigger part of how people are thinking about politics. And our government approval has been declining, and I'll show you what the numbers look like. So we have something we call the Disruption Index. And if you take a look at this, which adds together people's public mood, in other words, how am I feeling about my political leaders and the direction of the country, plus how I'm feeling about the economy, what you see is we moved into a negative zone, which means a disruptive zone, particularly this quarter. And I can tell you, I saw yesterday's numbers, and it's even gone down further on that. So the public mood is ornery right now. They're not happy. Overall satisfaction in Canada, the high that the Liberals experienced was 1 year after the last federal election, where it was at 66, where they reached a decade high, actually, the best we'd seen in a decade, or we've seen in a decade. They're now down below where it was for Stephen Harper before the last election campaign. So they're down to 52. Still not bad, but Stephen Harper lost that election, and he was at that time, if you go back to Q4 of 14, he was at 50, he was at, or just before the last election, he was at 58. Trudeau's down to 52. Is Canada headed in the right track or the wrong track? Are we going in the right direction, or are we going in the wrong direction? Canadians now tell us that we're, a higher proportion of Canadians telling us we're on the wrong track than we've seen in a decade. In fact, if you go back to Q4 of 15, actually Q4 of 14 is probably a better place to look. These numbers are far worse than they were for Stephen Trudeau or Stephen Harper going into the last election campaign at about the same period of time. Trudeau's government approval rating down to 40%. And if you go back to where they were in October 2016, it was as high as 64. So they've come down 24 points in the space of the last 2 years. By the way, the same time period for Stephen Harper, he was at 47. Does the Trudeau government deserve to be re-elected? 64% say no. 36% say yes. Stephen Harper at the same time period was at 42. So, dissatisfaction with the direction of the country, dissatisfaction with the leadership of the government, dissatisfaction with the incumbent, and the majority, pushing into 2-1, believing that they do not deserve to be re-elected. Now, I know every political scientist who's out there, every political expert, every armchair critic is going to say, well, majority governments always get re-elected. No, they don't. Not when their numbers look like this. Can this change? Absolutely. They have time on their side. But let's not underestimate how bad it is for the federal government right now. Issues. This is what the public cares about. And this is one of the biggest problems that the Liberal Party has right now. But it's also a problem for the NDP, and it's also a problem for the Conservatives. And that is, how well are you aligned with what the public cares about? Remember, find an issue, make it your own. Is anybody out there talking about healthcare right now? No. But it's the biggest issue facing the country when you ask Canadians. Not about their health care today, but what the future is going to be. So who has a plan on health care? What I can tell you in partisan terms, in terms of election campaigns, health care doesn't decide election campaigns. Nobody thinks that anybody has a good plan on health care. Everybody's worried about it. They're not looking for a savior. They are looking for a savior, and a savior is not available. So what tends to happen is people tend to move to the next levels of public concern when they start evaluating who they're going to vote for. So the economy, 25%, the Conservatives have a double-digit lead over the Liberals on that right now. Whenever the Conservatives have a double-digit lead on the economy, they win. Housing, a new issue. None of the parties are seen as doing any better on this one. This is an opportunity for the Liberals. Are they going to do something on housing? Taxes, the Tories have a big lead over the Liberals on taxes. Taxes, it's about affordability. Do I feel like my life is any more affordable than it used to be? Today, people are telling us that's not the case. And then the biggest issue that the government talks about in Canada these days is climate change, number 5. Unfortunately for the government, it's tied with taxes, and the battle is going to be over a carbon tax. So what do suburban commuters who now decide elections think about this issue? It's going to matter a lot. So do they think that they need to spend more to protect the environment somewhere down the road? Or are they worried about how much it's costing them today? The government says that they're going to give them a rebate. You have to have an awful lot of trust for the public to accept that. They may be able to win this battle, but I'm not optimistic. It's going to be a very, very tough slog on climate change. At the same time as they're trying to struggle with the economy, housing, and taxes above that. And then take a look at everything else that the federal government loves to talk about, which are all down at the bottom of the list: women's issues, racism and discrimination, Indigenous issues, international relations and trade. They don't even register with the public. Why? What the public's focused on right now is mostly affordability and my economic situation, including housing and taxes. So the big esoteric issues, the things that, more, actually I should call them esoteric because they're not. I mean, climate change is a real problem. But the public's not focused on that in the immediate term, in the immediate frame. So where are we on the issues? The Liberals, I would say, are struggling with an issue with issues alignment. What the public is caring about, they're not talking about. So they look distant, they don't look engaged, they don't look like they're focused on what the public cares about. That offers all sorts of opportunity for their opponents. What do voters care about, and what are you known for? That's ultimately what you're trying to find on this issue set, is an issue that's really important, in which the public sees you having a big lead on it. The Tories, on at least of the top 5 of those issues, they have 3 of them, or 2 of them. Nobody has any of the other 3. So there's an opportunity for somebody to grab it. The Tories already have a good position on 2 important ones. As I said before, misinterpreted a message for a mandate. Did the public really think that spending a lot of money to stimulate the economy after the last election and raising deficits was a good idea? No. They didn't even think that on the first budget. Have never thought that. You don't spend 2 generations in Canada telling people that deficits are a bad idea to all of a sudden walk out the next day and expect that they're going to think it's a good idea. So the government really struggles on that fundamental point. Its climate change plan, the public cares about climate change plan. Have they endorsed the idea of carbon taxes? No, it's a very difficult argument. Everything that's being done on many other issues, particularly on identity politics, social policy issues, the public, it's pretty divisive on a lot of it. And on the issue of immigration, and which is also on that list, where is it? Number 6 or 7 or 8 here. The reason that people are concerned about immigration is not because they like what the government's doing on it. So they've got some problems. Canadians are focused on health care, economic progress, and affordability, as I said. The Liberals are focused on climate and equity. Health care is a nonpartisan issue. You can only lose on it. The Liberals need to tamp down the problem issues, so the ones where that are real Tory advantages, they have to find a way of getting closer on taxes and housing and the economy, plus improve it particularly on economic management in order to be competitive, because economic confidence is declining. The Conservatives need a double-digit lead on economic management. It's the only way they can win. and the NDP to be a factor need to seize the progressive agenda, which really does relate to the issue of climate and the environment, and usually things that have to deal with income inequality. The wedge issues going forward will be the carbon tax, immigration, and tolerance. And you saw all three of those issues played out in the Alberta election last night. Geography and vote. Okay, here's the last federal election. The Liberals won with 184 seats. The magic number is 170. In black in all of these categories are the number of seats in each of those provinces or regions and the number of seats that the Liberals, Conservatives, and the NDP won in each of those places. So, knowing what you know about what the situation is for the Liberal Party right now, and I could show you the, actually, why don't I just move quickly to the next two slides, and then I'll go back to that. So this is what we have in terms of popular support right now. We have the Liberals at 30, and we have the Conservatives at 40. My expectation is that you're going to see, as we move further away from the SNC-Lavalin issue, because that's what's caused all of this. As we move away from the SNC-Lavalin issue, you'll see the two parties come closer together, but you will not see the Liberal Party move into a big lead because of the issues that I just mentioned. It will be close. The NDP's moved up. I know Jagmeet Singh gets a lot of criticism, but if they actually ended up with 21% in the next election, it would be their second best performance in history, the NDP. The Bloc is back. I'll show you the actual regional numbers here in a second. So here are the regional numbers. The Conservatives, at least in our polling, are leading in every single region of the country, with the exception of the province of Quebec. But even in Quebec, they're at 25, and all their seats are clustered around the city of, or around Quebec City. If they win 20, if they get 25 in the actual election, they'll probably win somewhere between 20 and 25 seats. The Bloc Québécois is up to 23. At the same time as the NDP is down and the Liberal Party is down. One of the biggest criticisms I have with a lot of the media commentary that I see on the province of Quebec is this assumption that the Liberal Party and the NDP, the way their voters behave in the province of Quebec is the same way that they behave in, say, for example, Ontario. Not true. The people who voted NDP in the previous two elections, yes, they like Jack Layton, but basically they were Bloc Québécois supporters who didn't like the Bloc. So they moved to the NDP. These are people who are nativist and nationalist. They're not going to vote for sunny ways. They would have done that in 2015 if they were. The only question is how many seats the NDP loses to either the Bloc or the Conservative Party. And if they don't move over to the Liberal Party, the Liberals won't be able to make up what they're going to probably lose in other places. So if you're a political person and knows anything about politics, all you have to do is go through this list and say to yourself, okay, where are the Liberals leading? Where are they going to lose seats, and where can they make them back up? And the answer is they're only leading in one place. They're probably not going to pick up any more seats there, and they're probably going to lose seats in every other place. Very tough to get to a majority with that kind of a map. Can the Conservatives win a majority? Maybe. I mean, a 10-point lead's a big lead, but they have to be doing better in Ontario than they're currently doing. Doug Ford won 73 seats in the province of Ontario in the last election campaign. Can Andrew Scheer do that? I don't know. Even with these numbers. Even with these numbers. The NDP looks like it's competitive, and it's competitive in two places that it has to be, and that's Ontario. And the NDP always does well where they've got some institutional strength at the provincial level, has been my experience. British Columbia, where they have the government, and Ontario. They're not going to win the election, but they could definitely peel away a lot of progressive voters if these numbers hold up. And if they peel away the progressive vote and the progressive vote fractures, the Conservative vote is solid. So whether people vote for the Liberal Party or vote for another progressive party, unless they all vote Liberal, who are on the progressive side, they lose. Because that's Canadian politics now. What's gone is the centre. Red Tories and blue Liberals are like unicorns. They really don't exist anymore. And and I would argue it's as much because the progressive side of the agenda has gone further left as it is that the Conservative part of the agenda has gone further right, although both have done that. The Liberals, their strategy was to go left, because they wanted to cut off the NDP because they weren't going to win very many votes from the Conservatives, or not enough to win, so they had to push the NDP down, which is what they did. And they did that by outflanking the NDP, both provincially and federally. So let's go back to the seats. So, 42 seats in BC. The Liberals won 17 last time. The NDP won 14. The Conservative Party won 10. So, how many seats do we think the Liberals are going to lose in BC this time to the NDP, or potentially to the Conservatives? Because every one they lose, they have to find some place to make it up. They only have a 14-seat majority. It's actually less than that because there's some independents now. Alberta, are they going to win 4 seats in Alberta? Maybe they'll win 1 in Edmonton. They're probably going to lose 3. Saskatchewan, Manitoba, are they going to win 8? Well, they'll win Ralph's Goodale's seat in Saskatchewan, but after that, it's a gunfight. Now remember, they have to find another place to make up every one that they lose. We get to the province of Ontario. They won 80 seats. It's where they won the election. That's 7 seats more than Doug Ford won. The Liberals absolutely stormed in Ontario. That's why they won the election. Do you think they're going to win the entire 905 this time like they did the last time? If they don't, then they have to find another place to make up seats. We get to the province of Quebec. You heard what I said. They won 40. Are they going to pick up those 16 NDP seats? I do not think so. So where are they going to make up what they're losing out west, and they're probably going to lose in the province of Ontario? And then we get to Atlantic Canada. They won every single seat. There's none for them to make up. So looking at those numbers and looking at where they are in terms of public opinion, you see the trouble that the Liberal Party's in right now. So leaving aside history lessons about majority governments being repeated and everything else, it's leaving aside opinions, just look at the numbers and see what kind of conclusion you come to. And by the way, there's a couple of polls that show it closer, but most of them are showing around what we have. It also explains why the government's been moving on things like immigration and a few other issues, because they're trying to deal with this problem. It's a political problem. On SNC-Lavalin, one of the things that I think is really interesting is you hear a lot of media chatter about the fact that nobody's paying attention. Well, 64% of Canadians tell us that they're watching, and we're watching what was happening. And it is the biggest explanation for why the Liberals dropped what they dropped and the Tories moved into a 10-point lead. So it wasn't just an Ottawa issue, it was an issue of character for the government. Who do you believe? 2-1, Judy Wilson-Raybould over Justin Trudeau, which to me is a shocking number, given his personal popularity until fairly recently. You'd think that Trudeau would at least be even with her, not even close. So every time the Liberal Party gets, and I do not know why they're doing this, every time they go in and start questioning her integrity, what are Canadians thinking? The more you talk about her integrity, the worse it is. But they continue to do it. They were even doing it yesterday. Saw some more stories in the paper. Sorry, move on here. Oh, and do you think that something inappropriate happened? Do you think she was pressured in the way that she said that she was? 3/4 of Canadians say that she was. By the way, it's over 50% of Liberals. So strategy. What's going to happen going into the election? It was going to be a competitive election. I would say that SNC-Lavalin made it more competitive. The thing about the SNC-Lavalin issue, along with the India visit, which was the other place we saw a similar gap open up, is the Conservatives can keep coming back to it, and the NDP can keep coming back to it anytime they like. All they have to do is stoke it back up, and they can do that with advertising and the way they decide to talk about it. The government is not in control of either one of these issues. So the opposition can use them as cudgels. The context is difficult. Is this a change election or not? Right now, I'm not sure. The numbers for the government are not good on this, but they've got 6 months to try and improve them. If they can push their deserve to re-elect numbers up above 40, there's some possibility that they could win. Actually, a reasonable possibility. There's an advantage to incumbents. The short-term economic confidence is wobbly. The numbers I'm watching right now are whether or not the Bank of Canada is going to be raising interest rates and anything I hear about inflation or cost of living. Because I know the biggest issue in people's lives today is affordability. There is a general sense in the country of a decline of progress that Justin Trudeau was supposed to reverse, and we're right back to feeling the way that people were feeling under Stephen Harper about long-term decline in Canada. It's a big problem, and it's undermining any opportunity that the government has of delivering a positive message, this general sense that things are not going well. There's a misalignment of Liberal Party priorities and public priorities, and I've already pointed that out. The map works better for the Conservative Party than it does for the Liberal Party, because there's all sorts of opportunities for them to gain, and there's all sorts of opportunities for the Liberal Party to lose. There's been blue momentum at the provincial level, Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, last night Alberta. Very similar pattern to what happened before the last federal election for the orange and the red side. This is good for the Conservative brand. It means people are starting to feel the same about that idea, that concept. Same way that they were feeling about the progressive brands going into the last election. The NDP remains weak, which is an advantage for the Liberal Party, but they're not as weak as they need them to be. They need to push them down to about 15. Right now they're too high. They're about 6 points too high. And as I said before, a big problem for the progressive side of the agenda. The Conservative side is united. The progressive side is fragmented. There's 4 or 5 choices that they can have in terms of how they want to vote. They can vote Green, they can vote for the NDP, they can vote for the Liberals. There's some other options that could potentially emerge on a regional basis. And whenever the progressive vote fragments now, it's an opportunity for the Conservatives. So what will be the strategy going into the campaign for each of the parties? I'll give it to you quickly. Any campaign strategist here would be telling you the same thing that I'm telling you. The Liberals, their positioning, shift to the left, pull the middle along, what remains of the middle, marginalize the NDP and demonize the Conservatives. So that's why you're going to hear an awful lot about tolerance, acceptance, climate change, all things that are trying to make the Tories look like they're not in touch with the values of Canadians and they're somehow a negative choice, is what the Liberals are going to be doing. Why? Because they haven't got a lot to brag about in terms of the performance of the economy or anything that they've really done over the space of the last while. Climate change, identity, income inequality are going to be used as wedges. Their goal is going to be to grow in BC because they have to make up for what they're going to lose in the rest of the West. Hold on to the 905 in particular and grow in Quebec. If they can bring over some of those NDP seats, they can possibly make up for what they're going to lose out west. The Conservatives, they're going to focus on it. Boy, this is shaping up into a real edifying campaign, right? Everybody's going negative. The Conservatives are going to focus on failure and hypocrisy. You said you were going to do things and you didn't do them. You're promising us that you're going to do more, you didn't deliver on what you already promised. Elitism. There's a lot these days that works for Conservatives in terms of talking about downtown elites. You hear Doug Ford talk about it a lot. You hear Jason Kenney talk about it a lot. What's happened ideologically in this country is the downtowns are separating themselves from the suburbs and from particularly rural and small town Canada, who really feel left out of our national conversation. And the Tories take advantage of that. They're also going to focus on the government as being tax and spend, and they are going to delight in a fight over the carbon tax. The government's going to call it a price on pollution. The provincial governments and the federal government, and the provincial governments, along with the federal Tories, are going to call it a carbon tax. I've rarely seen an issue in which two governments, last time I can remember was 1988, when two parties decided they wanted to fight on the same issue. 1988 it was free trade. In this election it's going to be the carbon tax. The Liberals want to fight on it because they think they've got a winning message, and the Conservatives want to fight on it too because they think they have a winning message. They're going to focus on the government's failure to deliver on some of their keystone promises, including the free trade agreement with the United States, which will probably not have been signed by the time we roll into the election, and scandals. The India trip, you're going to see picture after picture after picture of that. And SNC-Lavalin, you're going to see over and over and over again. They will announce no big plans, no big pharmacare program, no big anything. In fact, they're probably going to announce some reduction and some of the things that governments are doing. They're going to try and steal the 905 away like Doug Ford did with Kathleen Wynne. They're going to try and win some seats in Quebec, and anything that they can win in Atlantic Canada would be a bonus. The NDP are spoilers in the election campaign. They want to get the progressives back from the Liberals, so they want the vote to fragment, and they want to move themselves up above 20. If the NDP is above 20, the Liberals will lose. They're going to focus on Justin Trudeau, what they will present as his hypocrisy on climate change. Yes, you have a climate plan, but you also bought a pipeline. How can you do that? They will try to portray him as being hypocritical and disingenuous on his position on climate. Their focus will be on BC and Ontario, where they have good provincial presence. The NDP tends to fight in packs. They go from province to province to province. They're not really a national political movement. They tend to be a regional political movement. They have the government in BC, which gives them a lot of volunteers and other people, an organization to work from. Ontario is the same thing, where they're a strong official opposition. They've got a lot to build from. They can use their provincial organization. By the way, in case people don't understand this, the NDP is the only party in Canada in which you buy a membership for one organization. The provincial and the federal organizations are interrelated. The Conservative provincial organizations are not interrelated, neither is the federal Liberal organization. So the NDP, as I said before, tend to fight as a pack, and they've got two places where they can really campaign well. I think they're in desperate trouble in Quebec, and they're probably going to have a really hard time holding on to even a couple of seats in the next election campaign. So how are they going to do this? They're going to attack hard left, because they're not going to allow themselves to be outflanked the way that Thomas Mulcair allowed himself to be outflanked in the last federal election by the Liberals going to the far left. So I see this election moving directionally. The Tories are going to move further right. The Liberals and the NDP are going to move further left, trying not to get outflanked. The middle, as I said before, is unicorn territory. It doesn't really exist in the way that it used to. And the question is whether or not the progressive vote can unite. If the progressive vote unites behind one party choice, they can beat the Conservatives. But as long as the NDP is running well and the Liberals are running well, it's very hard for them to do that. Now that I've cheered everybody up, I will take any questions that you have. Thank you.
I take it you see Maxime Bernier and his party as one of those sort of 5% also-rans.
He would be doing handstands if he got 5%. He may be looking at more like 0.5%. The problem that Maxime Bernier has got is politics in this country is about money and organization. He's got neither. So there are some places in the country that there probably could be stronger right-wing groups, or voting blocks. So for example, Alberta. Well, Maxime Bernier is not their guy, right? I mean, he's not exactly from that place, right? I mean, he stands up in front of a microphone. He's not really connecting with that group of the population. So he's going to have a hard time doing that. You know, rural Ontario is another place where a candidate like that could have a chance. But as long as the federal Conservatives are far enough right, that'll suck all of that up. And if the real mandate is to defeat Trudeau, I think you're going to see, just as we saw in Alberta last night, where people who might have different point of view on the more conservative side of the agenda will still unite behind one choice in order to beat Trudeau, just like the Wild Rose and the Progressive Conservative Party of Alberta did. So no, I don't see him being a factor at all.
How do you see pipelines being played out for either party or any of the parties? Because it's a plus for some regions of the country, but not for others.
Well, for the Conservative Party, they will play hard on pipelines because they've got to obviously show some difference in Western Canada, with the exception of British Columbia. But for them, it's a failure point for the Liberal Party, because the Liberals, remember, they had this grand strategy where they were going to put together a carbon plan with the right to build pipelines, and they haven't been able to deliver on either one. So the Conservatives, to point that out and to say that they're going to be able to do something better on pipelines, they'll have to focus on it, which they will. It's bred in the bone in Alberta. The Conservatives have to be really committed to it. And what we also don't think about, though, is it's really a strong issue in places like Saskatchewan, too. So I see them going hard on it. the Liberals, it's a real problem. And it opens up an opportunity for the NDP, as I said before, on that. You know, you can't really both be for a climate plan and for buying a pipeline. And the NDP, which has the provincial government in British Columbia that has opposed the pipeline and Trans Mountain Pipeline, you can see them doing nothing other than what they're doing right now, which is to continue to oppose it. So that puts the Liberal Party in the horns of a dilemma, and it makes it really tough for them. The honourable member from Labour, Liberal member from Kenora Rainy River.
Darrell, this is maybe way out, but what about the question of stability? We've got Trump in the States, we've got Brexit, we've got the Chinese, we've got all these other things. It seems to me one of the things that Liberals might, or somebody might, the Liberals, because they're in power, might be talking about is stability, saying, you know, look at all these other problems all these other countries have. This is not the time to go rogue, if you like, and get rid of us when you don't know what you're going to get. These guys.
Well, you know, that could prove to be interesting, but then you'd have to make the argument that the Conservatives looked unstable. And Andrew Scheer doesn't really come across as somebody who's unstable. So they'd have to find a good argument that they could make to demonstrate that he was. And the other thing would be that people would actually have to be satisfied with the version of stability that they're getting from the government, and they're not. So that's why you're going to see the Liberals. And the other part is they love this campaign. They love the campaign. You saw them run it in 2004, 2006. They love the campaign, which is about those guys are nasty. You know, soldiers in our straits. We're not making this up. You remember those ads? It's the same guys. They love this campaign. They want to have that values-based type of a fight. So saying that, you know, we're about stability and we're not about that is not really where these guys see this campaign going. They want to run the campaign that Rachel Notley ran against Jason Kenney. They want to run the campaign that Kathleen Wynne ran against Doug Ford. That's who these guys are. They're not the old, you know, middle of the road kind of Liberals. These are very progressive Liberals. These are these are Ontario Liberals that are running the Liberal Party in Ottawa right now, and they are great campaigners. They're extremely aggressive, and they love the negative ads. They want to run that campaign, and the Tories want to run the other side. So that's where they're going to go. So I don't see this in an era in which people are trying to, as I said before, appeal to those emotional types of issues. These are emotional conversations. They're not rational conversations, because the emotional part of it tends to trump everything else that's going on. I use Trump there, not because I was referring to the president. No, I see this as two parties that really want to have it at each other based on values. Certainly. No, you first, go ahead.
Oh, okay. A couple of points. I assume you track fundraising.
Well, we don't, but the numbers are all there.
What you've mentioned here, your prospects and take on fundraising for the three major parties going forward, and I guess the third point is what effect do you think money has? Some parties extremely well funded or less well funded. Does this have a effect on outcomes?
Okay, so fundraising, the Tories are so far ahead of the other two parties, it's not even, can't even really talk about it. I mean, even though you have an incumbent government, the Tories have raised more money than the Liberals every quarter in Elections Canada's reporting since the government changed in 2015. So they're really good at fundraising. The Liberals are catching up, as an incumbent government should, but they haven't got to the same level. Be interesting to see the next quarter's worth of fundraising over everything that's happened in the last couple of months. But here's the thing about fundraising in Canada. It's not as big a deal as people seem to suggest. And the reason is because we really limit what you can give, and we really limit what you can spend. Now, any party would love to have a lot of money to run a campaign, but where they like to spend the money is not necessarily in the campaign. They like to spend it before the campaign. And the reason is because you don't actually start counting the money up against your expending limits until the writs are issued. So you found in the last election campaign that both the Liberals and the Conservatives started advertising well before the campaign actually started. And that's the reason for it. Now, they've just changed the rules to limit the amount that you can do pre-campaign. This will be the first time that that's happened. So we'll see what the effect is. But the way things are set up, it really benefits the Conservatives because they have way more money to spend than anybody else has. So if you're looking at fundraising as being the thing that suggests who's got the advantage, Conservatives have a big advantage.
I guess I appreciate your insight in this, and I'm sitting here wondering if we were here 6 months before the last election, whether much the same would be said in terms of, we were in that decline, and Trudeau came forward with policies that basically blindsided me. I don't know about anybody else in this room, but I never thought espousing a $10 billion deficit as an election policy would grab anybody. But it obviously did, along with all of the Indigenous and gender and everything else that, as you say, swung the 905. So then I'm wondering, so that kind of upset what I think was likely a trend that 6 months before Harper would get reelected, because let's face it, 6 months before, I'm sure Trudeau was in the wilderness.
No, actually, it wasn't the case. So just a couple of things. One of them was it wasn't policy at all that won Justin Trudeau the last election campaign. In fact, if you went out and you tested everything, and we did, that he was promising, people didn't really want it. What they wanted was him. So he, in a change election in which they'd had 10 years of dour Tory administration, they'd grown tired of Stephen Harper, who'd become really pugnacious, and they saw this bright young thing, this new type of leader. And progressives, the thing about progressive voters is they need to love, right? It's a vote for hope. It's a vote for that. And so the left needs to love. The right doesn't like politicians generally. So when somebody says, well, Stephen Harper's not that popular, it doesn't really matter. Not for conservative voters. Or Andrew Scheer's not that, that popular. People don't, really warm to him. Or Jason Kenney or Doug Ford or whoever. It doesn't matter because conservatives usually are anti-politics. They don't like politicians. In fact, they find the kind of stuff that Justin Trudeau presents himself as is really off-putting and disingenuous. They don't like that. But progressives love it. They want to feel hope, like for Barack Obama or, Justin's father, for Pierre Trudeau. That's what they bought into. What he was actually saying he was going to do was white noise. They were buying into him as a presence. So the problem that he has is he is way more important to his party and to their chances in the next election campaign than Stephen Harper was to his party. That's the difference. So the question is, can Justin Trudeau reemerge as a phoenix and get back that mojo that he had going in the last election campaign? Because that's what really won it for him. It wasn't people saying, hey, I think we should run deficits. No, that's journalists talking in Ottawa. The average person wasn't thinking that. They were thinking, now's a good time for a change. Well, this guy's been around for 10 years. Who looks the most like change? I like that guy. And that's why he won.
So then, all those charts you put up with all those issues,
Yep.
the top flag, the this and that, for this coming election, he'll still be there. So the issue will be personality, and we're right back to Diefenbaker and Pearson.
Yeah, he's going to try. He's going to try. But what they're going to do is they really, because the personality part isn't working as well as it did for them, what they're really going to push is climate change. So it's not just we need a climate change policy, it's that the Tories are climate change deniers. That's what they're going to try and hit them with. Catherine McKenna says it every time she shows up anywhere. And they're a bunch of racists. That's basically what their strategy is going to be. The Conservatives are going to say these guys can't run a one-car funeral. Everything that they promised they were going to do, they barely did any of it. And you know what? They're so out of touch with your values. We're going to offer a country that's a bit more subdued, a little less Hollywood, less downtown elite, and more Tim Hortons and less Starbucks. That's what they're going to do. That's the two campaigns. Now, what the Tories have going for them is they're perceived as being better on taxes. They're perceived as being better on the economy. What their specific policies are doesn't matter. It's just their values. And that's where they've got an advantage over the Liberals right now. Because the things that they care about, the public cares about, are the things that the Tories are better lined up on. And as a result, Trudeau's got a lot of work to do. But they're going to go dark because 2004, 2006 showed you this election. It's going to be just like that.
This has been another in our series of webcasts produced by the Royal Canadian Military Institute in Toronto as a public educational service. You can find news of upcoming events and links to our webcast archives at www.rcmi.org. On behalf of the RCMI, this is Eric Morse saying goodbye for now, and thank you for joining us.